I actually think it's difficult to argue that these highly extractive digital tools like generative AI can ever fit with agroecology. When we were first fighting against biopiracy in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, we were looking at companies, bioprospecting companies who would go to the south, go to a country like Ethiopia. When the Nagoya Protocol, which is part of the Convention on Biodiversity, was being negotiated, a few of us said to the negotiators, including the Ethiopian negotiator, this isn't going to work.
Gammadu, I know Gammadu.
Yeah. In 2013, Monsanto bought the Climate Corporation, which was
Climate Corporation.
Climate Corporation, which was a small little startup kind of coming out of Silicon Valley, and they paid, I think it was $1 billion for it.
Really?
And everybody was like, who the hell is this? What's this about? And what Monsanto said at the time was, in the future, we're no longer going to be a seed company, we're going to be a data company.
Welcome to the podcast called The Battle for African Agriculture, where we put a political ecology lens on African agriculture and African food systems. My name is Belay. I'm the General Coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Today, to help us explore these issues in some detail, we have Jim Thomas. Jim Thomas has a long history of focusing on emerging technologies, biodiversity, synthetic biology, and corporate concentration. I'm very, very much happy to have Jim here. He's an expert also on biodigital agriculture or biodigital food systems. Welcome, Jim.
Thank
this
you.
podcast.
It's lovely to be here.
So, Jim, let's start from your history. Could you tell us a bit about your background? How did you come into this work, into the ATC group in general?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born in Africa. I was born in Zambia, but I actually didn't grow up here. I grew up in the UK. And around the time I was a student, I was very involved in environmental direct action. I was part of movements that were trying to stop roads being built and trying to stop car traffic spreading and things around pollution. And at that time, I became very interested in the power of technology and what was the way in which there was technology, emerging technologies were driving problems. And I went on to become very involved in the anti-GMO movement in its sort of very early days in the UK, which was in the 1990s. And at that time, we had genetically modified crops that had just started to come into the food system. There were groups of us who were going out in the middle of the night and pulling up GMO pesticides. So that was really my entree into work around food and agriculture and biodiversity was trying to stop genetically modified organisms getting out into the environment.
You were one of those people who are called tree huggers and radicals.
Very much so, and particularly we were trying to stop the pollution getting out, and so we were very physically doing that.
Okay, so looking back, what drew you to focus on the intersection of technology, biodiversity, and justice?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say.
Yeah, please, you have all the time to say.
What drew me into that? You said.
Yes.
Yeah.
What drew you to focus on the intersection?
I think really it was the experience of understanding, particularly the issues around genetic engineering, the power of these corporations to use a technology to exert power over, the entire food system. Monsanto at that point was saying, they intended to control the seeds. They intended to be the lead corporation that was going to sell pesticides and tie farmers into agreements. And at the same time, they were releasing something incredibly risky that was irreversible. And that the way in which a fundamental technology could be used to exert power for these corporations just upset me incredibly. And then I wanted to know more about how corporate players use technology over our environment, over our lives, over biodiversity, over our food system. And that's kind of what I've been focused on ever since.
Yeah. What drew you to the ATC? And the ATC group has long tracked the corporate concentration of seeds.
Yeah.
How has this landscape changed over the past 20 years?
Yeah. So, as I say, I was originally very involved in grassroots actions around GMOs, and then I worked for many years for Greenpeace International, and was helping set up campaigns around the world about GMO food and campaigns. And then I became very concerned about nanotechnology, which was a whole other area of technology that was going below the level of the gene down to the level of the atom, and trying to rearrange atoms.
Why the concern on nanotechnology?
Again, that sort of level of corporate power, not just over the genes and the things that make up life, but the things that make up all of matter. And Etc. Group was pretty much the only organization in the world that was looking at that. And so I really wanted to work with them because they've always been many years ahead of other movements in my experience. And exactly as you say, it was in the early 1980s that Pat Mooney and Etc. Group, was then called RAFI, started to say all the seeds companies are being bought up by what were to become biotech companies, that there was going to be this genetic engineering of seeds, and that this would seriously affect small farmers in the global south. And at the time, people laughed at him. Like, that's pure science fiction. And then to see it actually happen and really happen, which sort of showed that they knew what they were looking at. And certainly, for Etcetra's work, tracking from the position at the end of the 70s, the early 80s, where there were many thousands of seed companies, to the point where there really are 3 or 4. It really is. It's Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva, and BASF. That's it, really, controlling most of the world's least sold seeds. Tells you how these technologies are not really about what they claim to be. They're about concentrating the market. They're about building power. And that's something Etc. Group has tracked really carefully all the way through.
How has that changed in the last 20 years? What is the change that you're observing now?
Well, I think that the biggest change, and it's very relevant to our conversation here, is when we go back to the 80s and the 90s, the way in which the big seed company, the agrochemical companies, were trying to gain control was through genetic engineering, and it was by tying the seeds to their pesticides, their herbicides, like Roundup Ready corn and soy and so forth. Today, what they're interested in is tying their crops to digital platforms, and they're using digital platforms as the way to gain control over
What do you mean?
seed and land.
What are digital platforms?
Yeah.
For our listeners.
Yeah. So to be really concrete, in 2013, Monsanto bought the Climate Corporation, which was
Climate Corporation,
which was a small little startup kind of coming out of Silicon Valley, and they paid, I think it was $1 billion for it.
Really?
And everybody was like, "Who the hell is this? What's this about?" And what Monsanto said at the time was, in the future, we're no longer going to be a seed company, we're going to be a data company. And again, it sounded strange at the time. The Climate Corporation had a digital platform, that's to say a sort of digital service that you could sign up for, which Monsanto developed, and now Bayer has it, which is now called Climate Field View. And what Climate Field View does is it takes as much data as possible about your soil, about your seeds, about the weather, agronomic data, economic data, and it pulls it all together, particularly takes it from your farm, and then it feeds it into what is basically an artificial intelligence machine. And Monsanto said that there are about 40, for a North American farmer, there are about 40 key points in the farming cycle during the year where important decisions are made. And
40.
And that those 40 points, they could get the artificial intelligence to tell you what the right way to farm is at each point. And so they would give you this farming prescription based on artificial intelligence that would be right for your farm, so that you would increase your yield, or you would decrease your pesticide use, or you would be able to store more carbon in the soil, whatever the metric was that you wanted. And so they then signed farmers up for this. And of course, part of this was that, it was connected to their products. The intelligence that you got, the so-called intelligence, the prescriptions were linked to how and when you used Roundup, or how and when you used particular other agrochemicals that they had. And increasingly were connected to tractors that were tracking exactly where you were and taking data, using drones to take data. So you have an increasingly digital mechanical farm taking all the data and telling the farmer how to farm, with the promise at the end that you're going to get higher yields or get a better price at market. And so that farmer field view model is now it's used more widely than GMO crops, for sure. It's on many hundreds of millions of acres, particularly in North America, Brazil, in the industrial farming. And that basically Monsanto, which is now Bayer, becomes a major consumer of data they're taking continuously from the farm. And not only can they then push the farmer to buy their products with these prescriptions, they can also sell that data. They can sell it to people who want to buy land, or so that's the basis of the model. It's now data. So they're still making genetically modified crops, and they're moving on to gene edited crops and RNA sprays and all kinds of things. But the data platform and the ability to grab data, sell data, and manipulate farmers using data is at the heart of it.
Wow. Wow, it's incredible. By the way, what is the merger between Monsanto and Bayer and Syngenta and Chemcam? What does it mean for farmers all over the world, and in African farmers also?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, and this is really driven by the digital agriculture. What you saw was the seed companies realized that it was the machines, it was the data that was going to be the powerful thing, and they kind of looked over at the machine companies like John Deere, for example, or Kubota, and so on, and saw that these guys could just buy them out and then turn them into digital, these digital enterprises, and so they ended up merging and buying each other out. So yes, you saw. Monsanto eventually got bought by Bayer. That was kind of a merger, really. Syngenta, which was already the result of several mergers, then got bought by ChemChina, which is the largest Chinese pesticide manufacturer. And Corteva came out of DuPont, who broke up in different ways. And the implications are what the implications have been for the last 30 years, that farmers increasingly, especially in the north, in places like the US, have no choice but to buy the genetically modified and industrial seed, because there is no alternative. For your area, you're locked into that, unless you can have systems of saving your own seed, and particularly organic farmers will do that. So there's that, but more, it's that farmers are then expected to step onto the treadmill of these data platforms, of buying the latest technology. That you need to have the tractors with the sensors, which are incredibly expensive, and so your overall prices goes up, and then you've really got to do that, and then they get pulled onto, expected to get carbon credits in order to pay that off, and so they become a carbon credit machine, and as long as they follow the prescriptions made by the artificial intelligence, they're promised carbon credits. But of course, that requires continued use of Roundup, continued use of fertilizer and high inputs. So
that's what we call lock-ins,
Was that?
They will be locked in.
Yeah, absolutely locked in, and it's just a deepening of industrial agriculture. Yeah,
it's incredible. I remember the word bioparasite. I think came from etc.
Yeah, and so that comes from
Pat Mooney.
Yeah,
Pat Mooney who named
that exactly.
So the first bioparasite is stealing of biological materials, basically. Now we are talking bioparasite 2.0.
Yeah.
What is that now?
Yeah, so as you say, when we were first fighting against biopiracy in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, we were looking at companies, bioprospecting companies who would go to the south, go to a country like Ethiopia. I mean, classic example was that, a company like Crop and Soil who came to Ethiopia, took teff, took it back to the Netherlands, and then, would either genetically engineer it into something or breed it and take out a patent on it, take out plant breeders' rights, and therefore gained ownership over that genetic resource, which was not theirs. It was the heritage of Ethiopia in this case. And that biopiracy of genes connected to patenting and so forth was to some extent slowed down by the agreements of the Nagoya Protocol, which was a big fight. But when the Nagoya Protocol, which is part of the Convention on Biodiversity, was being negotiated, a few of us said to the negotiators, including the Ethiopian negotiator, this isn't going to work.
Gamado, I know Gamado.
Yeah, this isn't going to work.
I was there in Nagoya.
Yeah. That's because now these companies are no longer taking the actual sample, the actual genes, the actual seeds. They're just sequencing it with a gene sequencer. And then you can upload that to the internet. You can send that across the ocean. You can download it onto what's called a DNA synthesizer that will print out the DNA you want. And there you go, you have it. And there's been no actual movement of material, no physical movement. So you have what they call this digital sequence information, the genetic digital version. And that's exactly what happened, is that, researchers continued to sequence, put large amounts of these genetic sequences onto databases. And then those got used to build, whether it's genetically engineered crops or microbes.
Can you actually convert those data into something physical, something seed?
Absolutely. Because, the idea is that DNA is just a code. It's made up of the letters G, T, C, and A. So if you can sequence it and you can say the strand of DNA that, produces a particular trait is GTTCCAA, you send that abroad, you download it as an email, and then you have a machine called a DNA synthesizer. And this literally builds the chemical DNA, and it will build it according to the code you ask it. So you want it to make it GTCCACTGG, it does so. That's one way in which you can then build that piece of DNA, and you can genetically engineer that into a crop, into a microbe, into a bacteria. The other way is now with gene editing. So gene editing is a set of genetic engineering techniques where you go into a crop or an organism and you knock out particular letters, or you add single letters, and so you can edit it away to match what you want. Again, all you need is the digital sequence to start. So that's the way in which the digital becomes biological. You take the biological, you make it digital, and then you make it back to biological again.
You insert it into something.
Insert it into something, exactly. Yeah.
So the bioparasite 2.0 is stealing is not the physical material, but the data.
Digital, but you end up with a physical thing.
Okay.
Exactly.
You've been deeply engaged into the debates about GMOs, gene editing, synthetic biology. How are these technologies being framed as solutions to Africa?
Yeah. So I have been sitting for the last decade on a UN advisory committee on synthetic biology, an ad hoc technical expert group on synthetic biology, where we've...
Excuse me, what is synthetic biology?
Yeah, I should explain that. So, exactly that way that we moved from cutting out a little gene from something physically and moving it across, we call that transgenics. You're moving the genetic material. Because DNA can now be turned into this digital thing, you can do the redesigning on a computer. And so if you can just digitally redesign it as if this was programming, and that idea is kind of the core idea behind what's now called synthetic biology, which is kind of like covers the next generation of genetic engineering. So synthetic biologists will say a microbe, for example, a bacteria, is kind of like a computer, and DNA is kind of like a program. And if you can change the program of the DNA, GTCCA, and you can kind of work it out with languages, you can reprogram the microbe to do anything you want. Theoretically, it can produce vanilla, or it can produce a toxin, or it can glow red. Of course, it's not that simple, because DNA isn't actually just a code, and life isn't a computer. But that's the metaphor. That's the metaphor they're working on. And so this area of synthetic biology, you have had many computer scientists, engineers coming into the biological world saying, we're just going to treat this as if it was just computing or engineering, and we're going to come up with all sorts of things that, as you say, could be promises for Africa. So the leading example that the synthetic biologists used was the example of gene drives. They found using gene editing, you could engineer an organism such that it always passes on a particular trait. Like, it makes its offspring always have yellow eyes, for example. And they did that with flies, where they put a gene drive into flies. The flies had yellow eyes, and all the flies had yellow eyes. And the concern was, if you let those flies out, all the flies on the continent would have yellow eyes. But the way they sold this was around malaria. If we can release gene drives into mosquitoes in Africa, then we can make it so those mosquitoes were all male, and then they'd all die, and then we wouldn't have to worry about malaria, or we'll make them so they're resistant. So we've seen on the continent Target Malaria, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others, trying to move to releasing these genetically engineered mosquitoes that will spread and spread. And that's been a huge fight on this continent, which thankfully just recently the Burkina Faso government has just shut down.
That's fantastic.
That's from the decade-long action by activists in West Africa. So that's an example.
Exactly. This conference on biodigitalization is a merging of biological materials with digitals or digital sphere. So how do you see that going in Africa? What's going to happen in Africa? If we go with that,
I mean, there's two parts to what's happening with the biodigital convergence. One is this question about how biological material is being turned into digital genetic material, and then that's being used. And I think there are some definite concerns about how Africa is particularly being seen as a source for new digital genetic material. There's a company based in the UK called Basecamp. And Basecamp has restarted that sort of biopiracy grab on genetic material. But whereas previously those companies, the bioprospecting companies, were looking for particular genes from TEF or something, now they want all of it. They want to grab as much genetic material as they can. And they're paying communities in places like Cameroon to scoop up water, to scoop up soil, and sequence it so they can build their own database. And that database is now the largest global database. It's a private database of genetic material, of microbes and viruses and so forth. And so they're seeing Africa as the source by which they're going to build their database, which is for training artificial intelligence. So that's a very real thing that's happening across the continent. To my mind, it's the mother of all biopiracies. You're not just taking one, you're taking all of it. And although they're saying there might be some money back to communities if they make something at the end, meanwhile, they themselves are becoming kind of the next Monsanto. They're building themselves up into this powerhouse. So that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is the way in which digital information is being used to kind of push farming around. And this goes to the platforms that we were talking about earlier. There's a real push to get sort of apps on your cell phone, like chatbot apps, where a farmer...
Chatbot
like apps? Chatbots, like ChatGPT, using AI, where a farmer might ask...
DeepSeek or...
a farmer might ask questions. Take a picture of a leaf and say, what do I do here? What should I spray here? What should I... And so through the chatbot, through the artificial intelligence, once again, they're trying to give prescriptions to small farmers. And these chatbot apps, if you like, these digital agriculture apps, are being widely pushed in collaboration with Corteva, with Syngenta, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And of course, there is a way of, again, pushing small farmers towards versions of industrial agriculture rather than towards agroecology. It also is a way for the AI companies, the artificial intelligence companies, the data companies, such as Google and Microsoft, to start taking data from those farmers, from people across the African rural landscape. You promise that you're giving them useful advice, and at the same time, you're taking personal data.
But what if somebody confronts you and say that you see a parasite on a leaf, on a plant in Africa, and the farmer takes his phone and takes a photo or scan it and send the information, and the information will be sent back to him, what to use, and he kills the pesticide. Then farmer is happy, the companies are happy. Yeah, so if they say that to you, what will be the response?
And I think the question is, you're one of the things where there's been technology assessment beginning to be done around this, where as farmer groups here in Africa are saying, well, what does this really mean for farmers to be given these digital apps? What they're seeing is it's replacing extension services, it's replacing local knowledge, it's replacing traditional knowledge, and then that where of course there's many ways you might have dealt with that. Of course, the answer is going to come back: buy this pesticide, buy this seed, spray this here. It's a very limited, quite industrial set of responses.
He's actually selling their own product. That's what they do.
That's certainly the concern. And at the same time, you're making farming reliant upon this device. I think there's for many years we've been concerned about how farming has become reliant on certain inputs, whether those are chemical inputs, fertilizer, hybrid seeds, and now we have a new input, which is data. And it is an input, and it's actually a high energy input, and it's one that requires metals and minerals, and it requires data centers. It doesn't fit within agroecology to be having this additional input. And it's an input that depends upon extraction of minerals and metal and electricity and water. And yet that's what's being pushed as a development, for the rural countryside.
So shall we call it a digital colonialism, this one?
Yeah, that's definitely what people have called it. and if you look at what these data companies, the likes of Meta and Google and Microsoft, the bigger picture, they look at Africa and they see a huge opportunity for extraction of data, and a huge opportunity for the extraction of minerals and metals, copper and cobalt, to make their chips, and a huge opportunity to extract water and electricity so that they can run data centers full of computers. They are acting as imperial colonial powers, and they are literally, if you look at where the data cables that they're running around the continent, they follow exactly the same routes as the colonial telegraph cables, which are exactly the same routes as the slave trade before that. And now they're putting those cables right through the middle of the continent. Google has one that follows exactly the same route as the Cairo to Cape trackway that Cecil Rhodes built. Like they're doing exactly as the original colonizers did. And this time they are coming after minerals, they are coming after water, and they are coming after African agriculture, but really they're coming after data. And they will sell their product, they'll give it away as if this was a gift to Africa. In fact, the Facebook Meta cable that goes around Africa, they call it the To Africa cable because it's a gift to Africa. It's not a gift. It's about extracting out the resources and the data.
Let's talk about the artificial intelligence, AI. And now it's entering into agriculture, and from predictive models for climate corporate platforms offering precision farming advice. What's your take on this?
I mean, many things. It's definitely the thing that I'm spending my time looking at closely. I mean, we're at a moment when the global economy is dominated by artificial intelligence. And you know, we were talking today about how if you take the top 15 companies by their value, the top 9 are all artificial intelligence companies, and out of that 15, there's 11 that are AI companies, and they're worth $25 trillion. And $25 trillion is 4 times the worth of Africa, if you want to sell Africa. The kind of level of economic power they have is incredible. And they're selling, you know, they're trying very hard to extend that. And to do that, they're building out an infrastructure, data centers, cables, like we were saying, that's going to be $7 trillion of spend just in the next few years alone.
Globally or in Africa?
Globally. But I think that, you know, the point, as I was saying, is Africa is the heart of that, because what they really want is the data here, the water here, the electricity here, and the minerals here. So they're really looking to try and make.
What about Asia, by the way? Why Africa?
There's definitely a lot of data centers being built in Asia as well. That's especially because of, I think, cheap electricity and water. But when you talk with artificial intelligence, or you read the work that they're doing, the real limitation that they're concerned about is data. They need more data to train their models. And the best sources of data are young people and biodiversity. And Africa has more young people than anywhere else. So, you know, 42% of all young people are here in Africa. 75% of this continent is under 35. And many of those people aren't yet on cell phones or on the internet. So if you can push the internet into rural areas where people live, offering these kind of agricultural apps, and get people hooked onto cell phones and smartphones, then you can begin pulling data from young people, and of course you begin finding biodiversity data as well. And there is the very beginning of a market in biodiversity. We're hearing about biodiversity markets, about the idea, just as we've had carbon offsets, we're going to have biodiversity offsets. And as that market in biodiversity as an asset grows, they'll be well placed to grab the biodiversity of the African continent.
Yeah. Okay. What dangers do you see there? You know, you already responded to it, but what dangers do you see in AI-driven agriculture in African farmers, especially around data, ownership, dependency, and inequality?
Yeah, I mean, I think the prime concern I have is the way in which governments, driven hand in hand with big tech companies, and particularly telecoms companies, will push this model of AI-driven agriculture into rural areas in Africa. Will say that this is the way that struggling rural communities can pull themselves out of poverty. That it's just as long as you have ChatGPT, you're going to be able to make yourself better in the world. And that will push rural development away from agroecology, away from building community-led models, and drive people deeper into dependence, as you say, on these companies, whether that's on the cell phone companies, on the data companies, and ultimately on the big ag tech companies. It's building, over time it will build dependency.
Do you see parallels with how GMOs were pushed into Africa?
Yeah, but I think it was harder to push GMOs into Africa because the way in which this is going to be done and is being done is around cell phones. And they're incredibly well designed addictive machines that are targeted at young people. And people will be told that these cell phones with AI chatbots talking to them are agents of individual empowerment, that you will be able to have the answers to things. GMOs, they couldn't really do that so well. It was hard to make the argument that these were individually empowering young people. But that's the argument they're going to make here. So I think it's going to be a far faster uptake unless there is understanding amongst farmers, amongst rural communities, that this isn't a gift to Africa. This is an attempt to extract data,
this is
basically.
This is much more addictive, as you say.
Yeah.
We are all addicted.
Yeah,
we know
we've all had that.
What's going to happen, when we if we open our telephone. But very, very, it's like a drug,
Yeah.
What is alternative, people-centered use of AI in food system look like?
What's an alternative?
Yeah. Can it be integrated into agroecology and food sovereignty?
I actually think it's difficult to argue that these highly extractive digital tools like generative AI can ever fit with agroecology. If you look at the 13 principles of agroecology, and you look at the kind of red flags that are when you think about whether something is agroecological, we have red flags. We say, it can't be GMOs. It can't involve synthetic materials. And one of those is it can't be extractive.
Yeah.
And this is fundamentally extractive. It's fundamentally extractive of data, of course, but it's also fundamentally extractive of energy. It's fundamentally extractive of minerals. We're looking at the next 5 years of needing about 1 million tons extra of copper, which is going to come from Zambia and DRC. It's going to come from the African continent, and cobalt and gold and rare earths. You cannot have a digital revolution in agriculture without increasing the extraction of the.
Actually, I agree with you, and the solution looks a little bit far, though. But so, question would be, what's our role then? The role of civil society, a role of people. I think we have a number of people here.
Yeah,
close over 100 people.
Yeah.
So, what will be the role of all these people? I mean, I agree with you. It's very difficult to integrate this extractive technology into agroecology and food sovereignty. So what should be our role now?
Well, I mean, I think simply calling out a full solution is the place to start. We have an incredible movement here on the continent who knows that the way we deal with our challenges, whether it's climate change or other challenges, is through agroecology.
Yeah.
And communities are proving that over and over again. Farmers are proving that over and over again. And governments are hearing that message. And that just needs to be front and center. It's not, we're going to have a bit of digital and a bit of agroecology, and no, it's through the traditional techniques. It's by coming together with the innovations and knowledge of farmers and communities. That's the tech that we want. And community, and it will be in community control. It won't be owned by Meta or Google or Basecamp Research. There's never going to be an AI industry that's African, or certainly not like South African or whatever. So real sovereignty, food sovereignty, has to start with technological sovereignty, and that technological sovereignty means working with the knowledge, techniques, and practices of people who live here.
Do we have examples of successful resistance to this AI and digital extraction that we can learn from?
Yeah, I actually think that the resistance is growing very fast right now. Like in North America, where you're and Europe as well, where you're seeing data centers, these huge data centers being built for the AI companies. We're seeing resistance to those data centers as well. We're seeing communities who are protesting, who are saying, we don't want you taking our water, our electricity, you're polluting our air. And they're shutting down some of these data centers, and it's just community resistance. Even here in one of the surprising things about artificial intelligence is, although ChatGPT, for example, is presented as being this automatic chatbot, actually it's trained by human beings. And those human beings are here in Africa. They're in Nairobi. They're in Lagos. Very poorly paid data labelers. And those data labelers are now organizing, and they're saying, we don't want to be part of this because it's abusive and we're badly treated. and then they're taking legal cases. That's resistance coming from African tech workers against this, and it's having an effect. So I think, and you know, even on the level of, you know, we were talking a moment ago about how smartphones and so on are very addictive, and yet we're now seeing, certainly across the north, countries saying children shouldn't be on smartphones. They're being pushed out of schools and banned from schools. Like there is a kind of parents are saying we're not going to let our children get addicted. We're not going to let our children be affected.
Yeah. So in the UK or in Australia, I think.
Yeah. So Australia, I think, actually has a
cap, like 16 years old.
I think you're not supposed to be on social media after 16.
Yeah.
But certainly where I live in Canada, my children can't bring cell phones into school. They can't do that anymore, whereas they used to. So there is a kind of waking up to the effect this has. And honestly, this is a classic thing that happens. Technology will you'll start to see in the north the effects of it. They'll start to tamp down, and then it will get dumped on the global scale. And this is another form of dumping. And so AI, digital tech, will be sold as this exciting thing, but it's also kind of a dumping.
Jim, this fantastic conversation. But if you want to leave us with a message, you know, somebody message, what would that be?
I think that's an interesting point. I think the most important thing I would encourage folks who care about the future of African agriculture is not to be dazzled by some interesting looking app or some exciting looking technology, but to see that often they're just deployed to take data and to take control over market, territories, needs, land, just as every other industrial technology and agriculture has been, and that we know how to transform African agriculture. It's by agroecology, food sovereignty, you know, supporting traditional practices. You need to double down on that. But that would be my suggestion.
Thank you very much. It was really a fantastic conversation.
Thanks so much, Maria.
Thank you.
Great.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.